These are the most disturbing crimes that happen in the Hello Kitty community, and with each case, the story takes a more horrific turn. For Maine police, October 26, 2014 started like any other shift, until a routine traffic stop turned into something none of them would forget. From a distance, they spotted a car driving in the wrong lane, and when they pulled it over and approached the window, they weren't prepared at all. The driver was Hello Kitty.
Police in Maine arrested a woman after they pulled her over and saw she was dressed as Hello Kitty. Cops say she was also driving in the wrong lane.
Dressed from head to toe in a white and red Hello Kitty costume was a 37-year-old woman whose license identified her as Carrie Gibson. Carrie was from Westbrook, Maine, a quiet suburb in the greater Portland area, United States. And beyond that, her private life remains a mystery. What we do know is that earlier that Sunday morning at approximately 2 a.m., Carrie was driving along Marshall Road, Gorham, Maine, when she accidentally drove into the wrong lane. When her car stopped, the approaching officer noticed that she wasn't only wearing the costume, but had a matching large plush Hello Kitty head mask beside her on the passenger seat. The officer then leaned in, took one full look at her outfit, and then asked if she'd been drinking. And Carrie replied that she was perfectly fine. Even so, her reaction earlier suggested otherwise, so the officer asked her to take a breath test to confirm if she was telling the truth, but Carrie refused, which only made him more suspicious. And so Carrie was arrested for driving under the influence. She was then taken to Cumberland County Jail for booking. Because she hadn't hit anyone, she had no additional charges, so she was booked for OUI, Maine's equivalent for driving under the influence, which normally refers to DUI. The next day, the county sheriff released Carrie's mugshot, showing her still in her Hello Kitty costume, without the head mask though, alongside a photo of the plush doll's head resting in her passenger seat. Now local media picked them up fast, and soon it was everywhere. That said, here's where the story actually goes quiet. Carrie's story ended with a mugshot and a mystery, but in the next case, the person caught with Hello Kitty wasn't so lucky. He walked away in handcuffs.
A thief thought he made a clean getaway after walking out of a Chino Target store, but an officer in the parking lot was alerted to the grand theft and pursued the U-Haul he left in on the 60 freeway.
An unnamed man walked into the Target store at 3900 block of Grand Avenue, Chino, California, loading items into his car. We will call him Peter. Peter moved through the store like any other customer, unhurried, ordinary, and pretty unforgettable. And when it was time to pay for the items, Peter rolled his cards away, walking out as if the receipt was already in his pocket and he'd paid. Yet what Peter didn't know was that from the moment he stepped inside the store, the loss prevention team in charge of stopping shoplifting were watching his every move on surveillance. Chino had been dealing with a surge of retail theft that summer, and every major store was on alert. The Chino Police Department had even stationed officers in and around parking lots across the city to respond fast when something happened. And something did happen. When Peter wheeled his cart out of the store, he made his way with the stolen goods to a rented U-Haul truck parked in a lot. He then offloaded the items inside the back of the truck and drove away. But the Target loss prevention team had already been alerted about the theft, so they immediately told the stationed Chino Police Department officers outside the parking lot, who then went after Peter. But by then he was already gone, so they followed the U-Haul. After a few minutes of trailing it, they eventually located it at the East-West State Highway known as the 60 freeway, where it had been stopped for a routine check. Body cam footage later released by the police captured the exact moments officers approached the truck off of the 60 freeway. The truck was then searched. Inside, they recovered all of the Target merchandise Peter had taken away, which were worth over $1,500, and they immediately returned it. Then they found something else. Tucked deep inside the vehicle was a clear Hello Kitty pouch, and inside it was fentanyl, a strong prescription drug used to treat severe pain, which also is so addictive that it has been the center of America's overdose crisis for years. Now, as a standard procedure for drugs like fentanyl, the officer asked Peter for a prescription, but he didn't have any, which meant that apart from the charge of grand theft, meaning stealing expensive items, he was also now in possession of narcotics. The officer's body cam footage then caught the moment Peter was handcuffed and arrested for narcotic possession alongside retail theft. Now at the station, the full picture came into focus. Though his name was still not revealed, investigators learned that Peter, who was only known to be from the city of Gardena, wasn't just a shoplifter, but also wanted for a string of other thefts that had happened in the city over the past few months, having stolen over $33,000 worth of goods. Peter had 4 active warrants, 2 from Los Angeles County and another 2 from San Bernardino County for property thefts and narcotic offenses. Under California law, grand theft alone could amount to 3 years in state prison, and possession of a controlled substance, like in this case, fentanyl, amounted to a year in county jail, or a fine of up to $20,000. And since he was held for stealing the Target items, 4 outstanding warrants, and possession of fentanyl, Peter faced a possible 4 to 10 years in jail for all charges if found guilty. Now 7 days after the arrest on August 27, 2024, the Chino Police Department posted the body cam footage on its Facebook. It showed Peter rolling out a red cart filled with merchandise out of Target. Then it showed a picture of the Hello Kitty pouch overlaid with the words, "Fentanyl also found in the vehicle." Now despite facing possible felony charges, Peter's identity was withheld withheld throughout the video, and his face was blurred. Now, while Peter turned out to be exactly who the police thought he was, a thief with warrants, the next case also started with a police alert and suspect. Still, the closer they looked, the more they noticed something about it wasn't adding up.
And now a stranger danger warning for students in Haia. Police say a man in a dark blue Honda sedan tried to lure 4 young girls by offering them a Hello Kitty plush doll from his car.
On July 7, 2025, the Honolulu Police Department put out a post warning about a stranger danger, which they tagged "Man offering plush doll." Earlier that morning at approximately 7:30 a.m., a group of 4 young girls aged 7 and were walking to King Intermediate School along Kamehameha Highway, Oahu, Hawaii, when a dark blue Honda sedan with roof racks pulled up near them. After pulling over near the group, the driver, who we'll call James, exited the car and approached the girls, offering to give them a Hello Kitty plush doll. He told them that it was inside his car and asked them to come with him to get it. Now, the girls politely declined his offer and continued going to school, so James instead got back in his car and simply drove off. Though by then, other passengers had already seen what happened, and what they saw looked like one thing: a grown man, probably a predator or maybe a child kidnapper, approaching young girls, so they reported it to the police. Now, when the call came in, the police began checking the vicinity for James's car, but he was long gone, and to warn the public later that afternoon, the Honolulu police made a post on its official Facebook page about the event of the morning. In a shared post with Hawaii Public Schools, they reported James's attempt to lure the girls using a Hello Kitty plush doll from his car, which they described as a stranger danger. The post revealed that a stranger, who was a Caucasian male about 50 to 60 years old and 5'9" tall, weighing about 150 pounds, had approached 4 girls in total. They described him as having gray hair and wearing a light blue Aloha shirt with brown pants, and added that the blue Honda sedan he had been driving was a late model with an unknown license plate. Now, the post then asked parents and guardians to teach their kids how to respond in similar situations to strangers, and afterwards it asked for information on James, asking anyone with vital information to call 911, or Crime Stoppers, or just simply physically report to any police station. Now, the alert spread like wildfire within minutes, appearing on almost every screen. Local media outlets across Honolulu like Hoodline, Hawaii News Now, Kon2 Key TV, Fox 8, and other social media platforms broadcasted it. Back at the station, however, the police continued looking for James, as they worked with the administration of King Intermediate School to interview the 4 girls and other passerbys who may have seen the man. They would also review surveillance footage of the highway, hoping to get a clearer look of the man. Nothing solid came back. After 2 days of searching with no good leads, on July 9, 2025, police showed the surveillance videos to the families of the 4 girls, and it was at this point that they got a breakthrough. One of the families recognized James immediately. He wasn't a predator or a stranger trying to commit any harm to the girls, but was actually the grandfather of one of the girls. He'd found a Hello Kitty stuffed doll she left behind and had driven out that morning to return it to her, and following this discovery, the case was closed later that day. Now, around 2:55 that afternoon, the Honolulu Police Department released another post reporting this new development to the public. They called the incident a misunderstanding and declared that James wasn't a public threat after all. They also withheld his official name from the public. Now, the police had added an appreciative post saying, "We appreciate the community's concern for the safety of our keiki. We also thank the staff at King Intermediate School for their cooperation with the investigation." Ending the post, the police said, "As always, we encourage the public to report any suspicious activity, even when it turns out to be a misunderstanding. It's important to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone in our community." And just like the police said, always report suspicious activities, even if that something turns out to be Hello Kitty in the middle of Times Square like the next case.
So we're seeing everything from to harassing of tourists to some violent behavior, and the problem is we don't know who's behind the mask and we have no way of identifying them.
In 2014, New York's Times Square had a problem. The costume characters performing there were getting violent. Earlier in 2014, tourists had repeatedly complained about how some costume characters had been aggressively asking them for money after photo sessions. In June of that year, a costume Spider-Man, for example, had been taking pictures with children of a tourist at Times Square. And after the pictures, the woman had attempted to walk away without tipping the performer. And on seeing that she was about to leave, the performer stepped in front of her, blocking her path, and started cursing at her, even punching the woman. Now, the commotion immediately attracted security, who then called the police, and when the police arrived, they arrested the man, who would later be identified as Philip Williams. Now, Philip faced charges of harassment and insult, since tipping wasn't mandatory. To regulate these characters, in September of 2014, the New York City Council introduced a bill, which provided that the costume characters needed a license and background check before they could perform at Times Square. However, this bill was stalling, and the reason became clear in November. In November, the New York Times revealed that the characters were fighting against the proposed bill to regulate their aggressive activity, 1980s. The Times reported that Hello Kitty, the Big Apple, the Penguin, and several others appeared before the council to testify against the bill, and this made it difficult for the bill to be passed easily. And so, these characters remained unregulated even as of early 2015. Now, by the summer of 2015, more reports had come in about the costume characters, and Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration, the former mayor of New York City, was under pressure to act fast to control the aggressiveness of these characters as it was starting to hurt tourism. Still, the bill hadn't been passed, and on June 4, 2015, things boiled over. On that Thursday afternoon, 40-year-old New Jerseyan Giovanna Melendez, who was dressed up as Hello Kitty, and 34-year-old New Yorker Sandra Mocha, who was dressed up as Minnie Mouse, were both performing at the Times Square Plaza near Broadway and 45th Street. At approximately 5 p.m., the plaza near Broadway and 45th was packed with tourists winding down their afternoons. A group of tourists then approached both women, asking for pictures, and after those pictures were taken, the tourists offered to pay, but only to one of the performers. But they didn't hand it to one person clearly, and since neither Sandra nor Giovanna had a manager, supervisor, or any formal way to decide who received it first, both thought it was meant for them and began arguing. But the verbal argument was only the beginning. Within seconds, Sandra and Giovanna were on top of each other, shoving, grabbing hair, and throwing punches on the sidewalk in the middle of Times Square. Right there, tourists watched in disbelief as Hello Kitty and Minnie Mouse locked in a full brawl. And so, in no time, phones were out and tourists began filming everything. Now, a minute after it began, NYPD Midtown South precinct officers on routine patrol arrived, breaking it up. And when it was done, Giovanna had a visible scratch on her face, but Sandra walked away without a mark. Fortunately, none of the tourists nearby had been touched. Now, Sandra and Giovanna were arrested for assault and harassment, as both performers decided to press charges against each other. After the arrest, they were taken to Midtown South Precinct for processing. By then, footage of the fight had already gone viral though, across social media platforms. Jake Rollman captured the moment on Twitter, posting photos from the scene with the caption, "Minnie Mouse and Hello Kitty got arrested. The mascots had to pull together and have a family meeting." Like Jake, The Tonight Show also mocked the brawl using a meme picture with the writing, "Recently, Minnie Mouse and Hello Kitty were arrested for brawling in Times Square. Parents were really upset, while kids were like, 'This is amazing.'" Yet, despite the charges under Manhattan's court system, cases like this rarely go to court. Instead, they are settled through desk appearance tickets, asking them to show in the court even though they aren't going to jail, or plea bargains, where the person pleads guilty for a lighter charge, or the charges are dropped completely. And since neither of the women had prior arrests, neither of them was jailed. Now, while Sandra and Giovanna made headlines because everyone saw what happened, in the next case, 3 million people had no idea they were already a part of a story until it was too late.
However, the security researcher who discovered the issue said he'd found records online which exposed a number of pieces of personal information about some 3.3 million Sanrio users.
Sanrio, the company behind Hello Kitty, created an online fan community, SanrioTown.com, in 2015. This platform allowed kids and young adults to create accounts, chat, play games, and engage with Hello Kitty content. It grew fast, and a few months after its launch, it had already pulled in millions of users. Now, later that year, on November 20th, 2015, something went wrong though. During routine website maintenance, a user database was accidentally leaked and was exposed to the open internet. This database contains sensitive information such as names, emails, birth dates, passwords, and even security questions. It had no password protection either, so anyone could have access to it. Of the 3.3 million accounts on the site, over 186,000 belonged to children. And if the data of these young children were to fall into the wrong hands, they could be used to open fraudulent accounts which could go undetected for years, putting the privacy of the kids at risk. And Sanrio's primary database wasn't the only one exposed. 2 additional backup servers containing similar data were also discoverable, but Sanrio had no idea. By November 22nd, the 3 databases had been found by Shodan, a search engine for computers and devices, and this search engine then made this data discoverable to anyone searching for exposed servers. Still, nobody in Sanrio had noticed, and these databases had open and unprotected for nearly a full month, until December 2015. Then, on 19th of December 2015, Chris Vickery, an independent cybersecurity researcher in Austin, Texas, was scanning the internet for any databases companies didn't know were completely open on the internet, and during a search, he came across Sanrio's unsecured databases. He then contacted Sanrio directly and its hosting company, telling them about the data leak, and to make sure Sanrio acted immediately, Chris called security media outlets, Salted Hash, and databreaches.net, threatening that the story would go public if Sanrio failed to fix the problem. Now, on December 22nd, 2015, in a statement to NBC News, Sanrio confirmed that they had secured their servers by employing better security measures to prevent something like this from happening again, and they reassured their users that no data from the site had been stolen, although they still advised everyone to change their passwords, just to be safe. What they didn't know was that during the exposure, a website had already taken advantage of their leak. It was called Leaked Source, a place where users could pay a fee up to $2 a day to search databases from breaches like LinkedIn, Twitter, MySpace, and Adult Friend Finder, to see if their credentials were in the open or to look up others. Now once the data was exposed, it had become searchable on leaked source, which meant that anybody could pay a small fee to see the emails and passwords of the millions of Sanrio Town users, as well as the information of users from the connected fan sites, such as hellokitty.com, and it stayed this way for another 2 years. But then in late 2016, when leaked sources operation had grown too large and visible to ignore, it caught the attention of law enforcement authorities, and they began monitoring its activities, waiting for the perfect time to strike. Eventually, in January 2017, they came knocking, and the site was then seized and taken offline. It was during this raid that they discovered leaked source had also scooped up Sanrio's data and sold it, a whole 2 years after the initial leak. The authorities notified Sanrio about this discovery. They confirmed that names, passwords, and email addresses were leaked on leaked source, but no financial information was sabotaged. And Sanrio acknowledged the stolen data, emphasizing to its users to enforce their earlier advice to change their passwords after the initial leak in 2015. Now, after shutting down leaked source, an investigation was launched into its operators. Authorities found out that it was run by a Canadian developer, Jordan Evan Blue. Now, Jordan was a former employee of Ashley Madison, a website he started working for in late 2014. The site was an online dating platform founded in 2002, famously known for catering to individuals seeking extramarital affairs, with the slogan, "Life is short, have an affair." Now, barely a year into his job, in June 2015, he resigned from the job, citing health reasons. And 3 months after leaving Ashley Madison, in September 2015, Jordan created leaked source, and he soon made around $180,000 from selling the stolen data. Now the police had a name, and so in December 2017, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested Jordan in Thornhill, Ontario, as part of Project Adoration, a targeted cybercrime investigation that had been building since 2016, when authorities traced leaked source to Quebec servers. From there, the case moved quickly. Jordan was charged with buying and selling people's stolen information, illegally accessing computers, tampering with data, and processing stolen property. A month later, on January 15, 2018, he appeared in Toronto court. Now, security experts told the court how the sale of data, especially that of minors, posed a long-term danger. They explained that the data could be used to open fraudulent credit accounts, which might take a long time before they're detected, because the child needed to reach adulthood to try to even access financial services before learning of the fraud. But even with this argument, the case against Jordan was actually dismissed, reasoning being that he couldn't personally be held liable for a leaked source, because the site was technically legally owned by the company he'd founded earlier in September 2015, called Defiant Tech. Defiant Tech was then sued in 2019 instead, and in May 2019 it pleaded guilty in an Ottawa court to charges of trafficking in identity information and possession of property obtained by crime, and was ordered to forfeit 247,000 Canadian dollars to the government, which is roughly 184,000 US. Like those Sanrio Town users who still don't know if the information was ever sold, in the next case investigators thought they knew exactly what they were looking for inside a Hello Kitty case. Yet they had no idea that the investigation was taking a darker turn.
Attorney Jason Johnson was formally arraigned down here today. Prosecutors say they found pictures and video on an iPad he disguised as his daughter's by, among other things, keeping it in a pink-colored case.
The Texas lawyer Jason Terrell Johnson had built exactly the kind of legal career you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years working Harris County's criminal courts. He was licensed to practice law in 2008, and over the years, he built a strong reputation as a well-respected criminal defense and personal injury counsel in Houston's Harris County court system, having his own law firm, Jason Johnson Law Firm PLC. Now, Jason knew how courts worked, and for a long time, that knowledge seemed to work in his favor. Then he started working with Jamie Joel Roque Perez, an inmate of Harris County Jail, Texas. Earlier in June of 2023, Harris County noticed that it was having a growing problem of illegal goods being smuggled into its jail through drug-soaked paper. Then in November 2023, Harris County arrested a lawyer, 78-year-old Ronald Lewis, for smuggling over 150 sheets soaked with drugs into prison. This led Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez to create a new system to aid criminal investigations, as part of an aggressive effort to eliminate the flow of deadly contraband into the jail. Now, to aid this investigation, drug-sniffing dogs and enhanced security screenings were provided for jail employees and visitors. Yet the problem continued, and they had no idea how or who was bringing them into jail. Later the following year, in August 2024, in order to find the smuggler, they tightened security even further and began monitoring inmate phone calls at Harris County Jail. Even conversations involving lawyers were being monitored, and on August 5th that year, they intercepted a phone conversation involving an inmate facing a murder charge, Jamie Joel Roque Perez. The conversation suggested a scheme was in motion with his lawyer, Jason, during his upcoming court appearance later that day. However, the phone call was so short that specifics of the conversation weren't provided. In order to uncover the scheme, investigators then placed Jason under close surveillance, meaning that his every move was watched. Now, during the court hearing later that morning at the Harris County Criminal Justice Center, Jason represented Jamie. Before the session started, Jamie's fiancée, who we will call Jennifer, showed up and sat in the gallery. She acted like a normal spectator, before then approaching Jason, passing him an envelope which was labeled Power of Attorney. A power of attorney is a legal paper that allows one person to make decisions for another person, and it can be legally enforced, so nothing looks suspicious about it. A few minutes later, Jason asked to speak to Jamie privately. He then took Jamie to the hallway, where he gave him the envelope. The officer who'd been sent to watch Jason caught the exchange, and he noted that Jason appeared nervous as he handed over the envelope to Jamie. Now, after every court session before inmates are returned to prison, authorities usually conduct a routine search, and so they did that day, searching Amy and other inmates in that holding area. Now, during this search, Jamie pulled out the envelope from his pants and handed it over to the law enforcement officer. Typically, such confidential documents are rarely opened, and if opened at all, the law provides that it should be in front of the inmate. But since they were already suspicious of the content of the envelope, the authorities actually opened it this time, and inside they found 6 sheets of paper soaked with what they believed were drugs. The papers were then seized and taken to forensics for testing, where it was confirmed that they indeed contained synthetic marijuana. And so what started as a search for a supposed scheme led them down the same path to discovering who'd been helping inmates smuggle in narcotic-soaked papers. At least so they thought at the time. According to Jennifer, who they immediately called in for questioning, when Jason heard about the discovery later that day, he was afraid and called her. He informed her that he and Jamie were under investigation and that she was likely to be arrested because of it. He then asked her to leave town and told her to keep the $2,000 which she received as payment from someone on Jamie's behalf for helping deliver the package. The following day, police interviewed Jamie concerning Jason's development in the smuggling. Jamie told them that Jason knew the content of the envelope and that he told Jason days before the exchange that this was the only way for him to be able to pay his legal fees by selling the drugs to other inmates. Now, before any charges had been filed on August 9, a letter was sent to the Harris County District Attorney's Office notifying them that Vikram Vich, a defense attorney, was representing Jason in the ongoing investigation. About 2 weeks later, on August 26, 2024, Jason, who was 42 years old at the time, was arrested at the courthouse and charged with carrying drugs into a jail facility, being part of an organized criminal scheme, as prosecutors suggested that he'd not been working alone and trying to silence a witness. All of these charges were felonies. At his arraignment, which means the first time he appeared in court, Jason pleaded not guilty to these charges. The trial was then set to a later date, and the judge set his bond at $100,000. The first hearing of the case was held 2 days later, on August 28, 2024. Jason appeared in court handcuffed, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit while being escorted by guards. Prosecutors told the court about the alleged scheme. The sheriff's office stated that Johnson is accused of delivering sheets laced with synthetic marijuana to a client who is incarcerated at the Harris County Jail. He's accused of making the delivery while visiting with the client during a court hearing that occurred on August 5, 2024. Vikram argued that Jason didn't know the content of the paper though, and lacked the intent to commit the crime. He labeled the case publicly a political stunt, claiming that Jason had been falsely accused. Now, Jason himself would even later say publicly that he had not known it was possible to soak drugs into paper until the allegations arose. And despite the prosecutor's argument, the court ruled that they didn't have enough evidence to support the charges, and Judge Brian Warren reduced Jason's bond to $45,000, placing him under strict conditions. Now, these conditions included a probation from contacting Jamie and provided that Jason was to remain under surveillance, yet it still allowed him to continue practicing law after posting bail. Even so, the investigation kept going. The next month, in September 2024, police carried out another search. This time, they searched Jason's electronic devices, and when they searched his devices, they found an iPad stored in a pink Hello Kitty case, the kind you would buy for a child. Now, initially, investigators thought he was trying to conceal evidence for the drug charge, but what they found inside had nothing to do with drugs. Inside, investigators actually found inappropriate images and videos of a little human, and when questioned, Jason said that the device belonged to his daughter, who he claimed might have been targeted by an online predator, which is why it was pink and had a Hello Kitty case around it. Now, his defense team also expressed their concerns for his daughter, and said that they were doing all they could to find and identify the offender. Still, the prosecution wasn't convinced, and so days later, on September 24th, 8 counts of possession of inappropriate content were then added to his existing charges, and they re-arrested him. Now, the Hello Kitty case detail and the suggestion that the iPad had been disguised as a child's device sent the story national. In early 2025, the pre-trial hearings began. Jason's legal team argued that the prosecution's case was weak because of 3 things. First, they said that the drug smuggling charges lacked proof that Jason had knowledge that the paper contained drugs, since he had no way to test the documents for drugs. As an attorney, it was a usual practice to pass documents to their clients without testing their chemical composition. The second second weakness was that the entire drug smuggling charge rested heavily on the statements of Jamie and Jennifer. Lastly, the prosecution still needed to prove that the iPad belonged to Jason and that he knew about the photos in it. And since the defense claimed that it belonged to his daughter and an online predator was actually responsible, they challenged prosecutors to prove otherwise. Now those arguments appear to have done their work, because in September 2025, just 2 weeks before the trial, the district's attorney's office dropped all charges against Jason. They said that the witness statements had changed substantially during the investigation and they didn't have enough evidence to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And so in the aftermath of the dismissal, Jason publicly declared that he'd been finally vindicated, maintaining that he was innocent and had been wrongfully targeted. Whether this was true or not, nobody really knows. Unlike Jason though, whose Hello Kitty case created enough doubt to walk free, the person who carried the name in the next case never even made it to the courtroom.
Rayane Nazaré Cardoso, conhecida como Hello Kitty, e outros 2 suspeitos ainda não identificados foram baleados e morreram.
Rayane Nazaré Cardoso da Silveira grew up across the Guanabara Bay from Rio de Janeiro, in a town where church hymns and gunfire often overlapped. It was a place where survival demanded impossible choices, and this she would soon learn. Born on December 25, 1999 in the city of Niterói, Rayane began her early life in Morro da Ilha da Conceição, a favela, which is what small shanty towns in Brazil are called. Now this town was known for its extreme poverty and limited access to education and employment, but not only was the city poor, it was also notorious for its drug trafficking and violence, and as a result, at a young age, she became entangled in a life of crime. She sold drugs within her neighborhood and got pulled into gang violence. Now the lifestyle demanded a lot from her, more than she ever imagined, and Rayane couldn't do it anymore. So in November of 2015, at age 15, Rayane decided she wanted to find her purpose. She found Christ and joined a local evangelical church in Niterói, where she began singing in the choir. There she actually became famous for her performance as a gospel singer, building a small following, and those who knew her during this time described her as a devoted, talented, and aspirational gospel singer. Yet while things seemed to change for the better for Rayane, the following year in 2016, she fell in love with a boy who I'll call Henry, and he was still involved in crime, and she soon left the church, and not long after found herself pregnant. Now she later gave birth to her daughter, becoming a mother at just 17. But the next year in 2017, Rayane and Henry began having issues and they broke up, and in 2018, Rayane gave love another chance after meeting a man who was only known publicly as an armed robber. However, we will call him Judas. A few weeks after they met, Rayane and Judas' relationship blossomed into one of intense pleasure, fun, and of course crime, as they began committing thefts in a neighborhood called Fonseca. They would drive around on a black motorcycle, steal bags, phones, and whatever valuables they could snatch from passerbys, and then rob stores in and around the neighborhood. Now their crime would even go beyond borders, entering the island of Ilha de Conceição, where the couple and a small gang of friends began stealing vehicles. Now during one of their robberies, they were forced to abandon their vehicles on Conceição's island after a preventative detention warrant was issued for them. Before the police arrived though, Rayane luckily escaped, leaving behind one of her accomplices, Juliano Almeida Concalves, who was then arrested. That same year in 2018, in one of Judas' robberies in Minas Gerais, an inland state bordered by Rio de Janeiro, he and his gang were ambushed by the police, and a shootout began in which Judas was shot and killed. Now when the word reached Rayane that Judas was dead, she had no time to grieve, because the police were already looking for her. Rayane didn't know what to do. Now back home, she had no one to protect her from the police, and they were looking pretty much everywhere for her, so she decided to relocate to another city nearby, Favela do Saibo in São Gonçalo. Like Ilha de Conceição, Favela de Saibo was just another favela with the same substance, drugs and crime, although it was a different faction that controlled its criminal activities and it was a higher level of crime. Now in this new city, Rayane needed money to survive, but not many normal jobs were readily available here, and with few options, Rayane did what survival in Favela de Saibo required. This time she worked as an armed guard for one of the biggest criminal factions in Rio de Janeiro, Amigos dos Amigos. There she trafficked drugs, extorted people, and controlled favela territories for her faction. Now during her run-ins with a rival group in 2019, she met a man who would soon become somewhat of a father figure to her, named Alessandro Luis Vieira Moura, also known by his criminal moniker 20 Anos. He was the head of trafficking of a group of favelas located in the north zone of Rio de Janeiro called the Salgueiro Complex. 20 Anos persuaded her to switch sides and join his faction, Comando Vermelho, meaning Red Command. The Red Command is one of Brazil's largest and most powerful criminal factions, with deep historical roots in Rio de Janeiro's prison. Now, apart from its influence in Brazil, it was a rival faction to her current faction, Amigos, which had been founded by former members of the Red Command. Now eventually, Rayane agreed and joined the Red Command. She knew that switching sides was a move that often led to retaliation by the previous faction, yet she did it anyway, and it only led her further down the path she'd been trying to escape from. With the Red Command and 20 Anos backing, she was untouchable. Because of their relationship, 20 Anos trusted her and made her a second in command, and it was during this time that she was nicknamed Hello Kitty by her faction members because of her appearance. While she was young, feminine, and looked gentle, she was also fearless and daring. Now as the name grew on her, everyone started calling her Hello Kitty, even the police and media. On her social media herself, she boldly posted pictures of herself posing with high caliber and uncommon rifles and pistols, often at home or in the neighborhood, and this made people suspect that she was a gang member. Now, as her criminal activities continued, the police began searching for her and her faction members for drug trafficking. On July 23, 2019, the civil police conducted a large operation in São Gonçalo, where they specifically targeted and searched for Hello Kitty and Vincianos. Now, while they successfully closed in on most of the Red Command members, Hayane and Vincianos escaped, and so the police circulated one of her social media pictures with guns with the caption, "Wanted by the police." Now, even though she was wanted, Hayane continued trafficking drugs and working with Vincianos. By 2020, she and Vincianos were already known as one of Rio de Janeiro's most wanted criminals and had a 1,000 Brazilian reais reward on each of them, which was approximately $200 at the time. Now, despite this, the favela neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro was very big on loyalty, and snitching was considered more dangerous than the police putting a gun to their heads, and so no one told the police about their whereabouts. Still living her criminal life the same year in 2020, she met Ana Livia Souza Lima, also known as DJ Isa, in a funk music event, and the two quickly became friends, and then falling in love almost immediately. In no time, they became a public sensation, posting themselves on social media, all loved up in pictures. Still, in April 2021, their relationship began experiencing issues as well, and later ended because of what DJ Isa described as tumultuous circumstances. Now, after the breakup, Hayane was heartbroken. For the first time, she thought of leaving the faction and starting over, but that would mean abandoning the man who'd become like a father to her, so she felt trapped. Now, months later, in July 2021, she finally made an attempt to leave. She contacted a community leader asking for help. In a leaked WhatsApp message, she told him, "I want to get out and I'm afraid." Hayane told him that she didn't know how to go about, and she was scared of the police as well. Her contact, however, told her to stay with her faction, warning her that if she left, she was exposed to the police and would not be protected anymore. In another message, Hayane told her friends that she wanted to return to church. Now, a few days later, on July 16, 2021, Hayane, Vincianos, and some of their faction members were accused of taking a family hostage on Estrada de Itaoca. Police claimed that they'd abducted the family and shot the agents guarding them, and so at about 6 AM in the morning, police arrived and raided the complex. And during the raid, a shootout began, and Hayane and some of her gang members attempted to flee in a car. Police immediately pursued them in their armored vehicles, closing in on them around a public road close to bus lines, using the support of the special operations and dogs. Now, surrounded with nowhere to run, they kept shooting, and the gunfire echoed down the road, scaring off commuters as the chase pushed forward. Now, as they approached the bus lines, police had to hold their fire to avoid hitting innocent bystanders, and when Hayane and her gang noticed, they tried to flee, but it was too late. The police were right behind them, and then the shooting started again. The gunfire from both sides didn't stop. Round after round, it tore into the vehicles as it pushed through the road, and by the time the last shot was fired, the car had been struck 34 times, and it stopped moving, looking almost unrecognizable. Now, when the officers approached and looked inside, Hayane and Vincianos were dead, and two other gang members, Mikael Wander and Victor Silva, who'd been in the car with them, were dead too. Now, inside the car, police found 2 pistols and a rifle, which they seized. The bodies were then transferred to Alberto Torres State Hospital. Now, the story of Hayane and Vincianos' death spread across social media. Almost all Brazilian news outlets picked it up, and everyone talks about the Hello Kitty, the 21-year-old gang princess who died in what the Sun called a bloody last stand. Now, amid the headlines, when police checked for the family that had been reportedly taken hostage in the complex, they didn't actually find them. It was a false alarm, but this only made the police more eager to crack down on criminal activity in the area. And so just 5 days later, on July 22nd, 2021, DJ Isa was arrested too. Now, Hayane died the way she lived, with a gun in her hand. Though in Hong Kong, the Hello Kitty name didn't belong to a gangster, but what was stuffed inside that doll is something you won't forget.
Why a toy? Some believe it was mockery, a final humiliation. Others think it was convenience, a way to hide a skull in plain sight.
It's April 1999, Hong Kong. A young woman is locked in a room deep inside the city. She doesn't know how long she's been there. She just knows that every time she hears footsteps or the door unlocking, she prays that they don't come in. This was the story of Fan Manye. Manye was born in 1976 in Shenzhen, China, to poor parents who could barely afford to feed themselves. As a result, they couldn't take care of her. And so when she was very young, they placed her in an all-girls orphanage in Ma To Wai, Hong Kong. She spent most of her childhood there. But once she turned 15, Hong Kong's orphanage age restrictions forced her out. And with no family members willing to take her back, Manye was homeless, broke, and alone, and she survived sleeping on the streets of Hong Kong. And it was during this time that she fell in with other homeless kids who introduced her to meth and heroin, and so she became addicted quickly and started looking for ways to fund this addiction. Now, one of the ways she explored was erotic work on the street. She would stand at the back of alleyways, go to bars, and sleep with other people in the street with the promise of money or drugs. Now, she did this for over 5 years, and in 1996, at age 20, while still a worker, she met another drug addict and client, Ying Shi Yuan. Not long after they met, it, they fell in love and began dating, and soon after they even got married. At first, the relationship seemed like it was going to be a fairy tale of drugs and activities to her. Then things changed though, and the relationship became abusive fast. Neighbors in their apartment could hear frequent violent fights that broke out regularly between them. A year later, in 1997, now 21, Manye got a job. Although it wasn't far from street work, it was at least indoors. This time she worked as a hostess in a brothel known as the Romance Villa in Chamshui-po. Romance Villa was one of the biggest entertainment spots that was used for illegal activities and controlled by the Wuxing Triad, which was one of the oldest and most powerful organized crime groups in Hong Kong. It was at this place that she met a regular customer of the brothel and member of the Wuxing Triad group, Chin Man Lok. Man Lok was a drug dealer and a loan shark, and in no time he and Man Yi got closer. Now the following year in 1998, Man Yi got pregnant by her husband, and upon getting pregnant, she changed. She wanted to protect the child and give it a normal life, so she actually quit drugs and her work, leaving her job at Romance Villa. In November that year, she gave birth to their son. Now Man Yi then got another job as a hostess at the Empress Karaoke Club in Bangkok, where she served tables and attended to guests. The pay wasn't good, still she worked hard despite the financial hardship that she was facing. Now even though Man Yi had left that world behind, she still kept in touch with her former client, who was 33 at the time. Now in 1999, her marriage had collapsed and she separated from her abusive husband and moved to a new home, navigating life alone as a single mother. And life was hitting her hard and she desperately needed money to sort out some bills. So one day in early 1999, she visited Man Lok. She needed money and was going to ask for a loan, but when she got there, she saw Man Lok's wallet simply lying around, and desperate, she stole the equivalent of roughly $500 from it. Now once Man Yi had her bills sorted out, she saved up the money and returned it to Man Lok. She apologized for stealing from him and explained herself. Now despite being friends with Man Lok, he refused to accept the money. Instead, he requested an interest, demanding a total of approximately $1,800. Now Man Yi begged him to give her some time to save up, and Man Lok agreed. Even so, on March 17, 1999, Man Lok made a decision. He, 21-year-old Leung Wai-yun, and 27-year-old Leung Xing-shou planned to kidnap Man Yi and force her to work as a worker to pay off her debt. Now Xing-shou brought along his 14-year-old girlfriend, Lau Ming-fong, who unknown to her family at the time had also been drawn into Man Lok's orbit. Now Man Yi, who had been at her flat, was preparing for work when the four friends arrived at her home, tied her up, and bundled her into a vehicle. She was then taken into an apartment at number 31st Granville Road, Sim Shat Suite, and kept in a room on the 3rd floor, Block B. There, she was locked up and tortured. Over the following months, she would become the toy of the group, who were mostly always high on drugs, and soon they started calling in more visitors. They'd also hit her with whatever was within reach, hurting her skin and reopening wounds they'd already made. On some days, the beatings alone numbered in their dozens, though they demanded that she smile, and if her face showed even a flicker of pain, there were consequences. Now within weeks, her body had been broken down so much that walking became impossible, and still she had nowhere to run, so she simply stopped trying. Still, the human body has limits, and by mid-April 1999, hers had reached them. So somewhere between April 14 and 16, after surviving a month of captivity, degradation, and pain inside the apartment, Man Yi died. She was 23. Now when the group noticed that she was dead, they didn't panic. Instead, they planned a way to make her body disappear. First, they got a saw and began cutting. Then they brought out pots and boiled the water to destroy forensic evidence. And afterwards, they disposed of them in different trash dumps. And tiny parts were flushed down the toilet, and other parts were hidden in concrete at a construction site in Hong Kong. Now after discarding almost every part, the skull, which had been boiled, was then sawn into a large Hello Kitty mermaid plush doll filled with dead insects. And then, as if none of it happened, the group resumed their normal life. Wai Yung and Xing Shu continued their work at a retail store near Granville Road, while Ming Fong was placed at a girls' reform school by her parents, and Man Lok continued his work for the tribe. To them, their secret had been buried and discarded alongside the parts of Man Yi. None of them expected what was coming next though. At school, Ming Fong started having panic attacks and recurring nightmares of Man Yi, and when Ming Fong could no longer bear the guilt, she confessed everything to a social worker at the reform school on May 24, 1999, and the school worker then took her to the Yao Ma Te police station, where she told the police what her friends had done. She also told them that she was Xing Shou's girlfriend, and Man Lok had been doing stuff to her at the same time. Now, at first, the police dismissed Ming Fong's story, but when they checked Man Lok, Wai Yun, and Xing Shou's records, they discovered that Man Lok had a prior conviction for drug trafficking and assault in 1991. So they decided to search the apartment to find out if her information would check out. Now, 3 officers then went with Ming Fong to the apartment at Granville Road, and once there, they found Man Yi's skull in the Hello Kitty plush mermaid doll, as well as her organs in plastic bags. They also discovered that earlier on, the cleaning lady in the apartment had reported finding a blood-soaked mattress, bloody clothing, human hair, shattered glass, and even a bloodied electric wire, but it hadn't been connected to a specific crime. The DNA collected was also not a match with any in the system. And so 4 days later, in the early hours of the morning on May 28, 1999, SWAT officers raided the Granville Road apartment, yet none of the suspects were there. They, however, found security footage from a nearby toy store showing them buying the Hello Kitty mermaid plush doll, just as Ming Fong had described it. Now, the same day, Man Lok was arrested at his home, where he had lived with his wife and newborn baby. His wife, Chan Se, was first detained as a suspect, but was later released when no evidence was found linking her to the crime. Xing Shou was arrested shortly after, and before Wai Wai-Yun was picked, the arrest had already made it to a local newspaper, which tagged the case the Hello Kitty murder. And when Wai-Yu saw the news, he fled to mainland China, hiding in Guangxi. Now, in a bid to find him, Wai-Yun was then placed on Interpol's most wanted list, as the police continued looking for him in and outside Hong Kong. Now, on June 3rd the same year, Man Yi's skull was formally identified. Forensic analysis had used a photo overlapping method, which uses photographs of a person when alive and images of a skull to identify similar facial features. Yet they couldn't identify the exact cause of her death. While the abuse she'd endured was severe enough to kill her toxicology also showed drugs, so whether she died from violence, the drugs, or both couldn't be confirmed. Then again, the police still needed to find Wai-Yun, so the case would go to court. Now, the following year, on February 14, 2000, he was actually arrested because of passport irregularities, and when the authorities discovered that he was wanted, they contacted Hong Kong police and he was extradited to Hong Kong 3 days after. In October that year, Man Lok, Wai-Yun, and Xing Shou faced trial at the Hong Kong High Court. Ming Fong was granted full immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony, and she of course agreed. Standing before Justin Peter Wing and a 9-person jury composed of 8 men and 1 woman, Ming Fong told the court about all they'd done to Man Yi. Even so, Man Lok, Xing Shou, and Wai-Yun denied murdering Man Yi, but admitted to dismembering. Now, psychiatric reports from Castle Peak Hospital and Siu Lam Psychiatric Center also described the 3 as being remorseless and had clear signs of psychopathic behaviors. The main issue, however, was the charge. While prosecutors argued murder, saying that the trio had intentionally killed Man Yi, the defense argued that since the exact cause of death was unknown and could have been a result of traumatic shock or overdose worsened by her injuries, it was manslaughter, ultimately a reckless act by them and not intentional. On December 7, 2000, a 6-3 jury vote then convicted all 3 men of manslaughter, and while delivering the sentence, Justice Peter Wing said, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years had a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness. The public's entitled to protection from people such as you." He then sentenced all 3 to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 20 years, calling this case the most depraved case in Hong Kong's recent history. But they weren't satisfied with the sentence and appealed immediately. Man Lok and Wai-Yun's appeal was heard in August 2003. Finding that they posed a threat to society though, the Court of Appeal upheld their life sentences. Now, despite being described as having psychopathic traits, the following year in March 2004, Xing Shou's appeal was heard. For some reason, his sentence was reduced to 18 years. If only they knew that he would be back in handcuffs years later. The same year on March 24th, nearly 5 years after death, Man Yi's skull was cremated and returned to her family in Shenzhen. Following the appeal in September 2012, the Granville Road apartment where Man Yi was held hostage was demolished and rebuilt as the Soravit Hotel in 2016. And as a common practice in Hong Kong, sites that were associated with violent deaths, 3 Buddha portraits installed for a spiritual protection. Now, years later, in April 2014, Xing Shou was released from prison after serving a sentence. And 8 years after his release in August 2022, he was arrested yet again for doing stuff to a 10-year-old and sentenced to 12 months in prison. In 2020, Man Lok and Wai-Yun were both eligible for parole. However, no release has been reported, and as of early 2026, both men remain in Stanley prison. Now, while the trio may have tried to use Hello Kitty to hide their crime, in the next case, one man's love for Hello Kitty didn't just identify him, it hunted him down.
Colazzo is charged in connection with an attempted attack caught on video at an IHOP restaurant in May.
Edgar Collazo was born in 1989 in Orlando, Florida. He lived a very private life, and so very little is publicly known about his early life or family background. But what we do know is that by his early 20s, Edgar had already begun being violent towards women and was building a criminal record centered around this pattern. In April 2010, Edgar got into an argument with his ex-girlfriend, we'll call Sabrina, and she was pregnant at the time. By the end of that argument, he choked her and punched her in the stomach. After the incident, Sabrina went to the police and Edgar was arrested for battery. Now, the case went to court and Edgar pleaded guilty to the charge, but rather than receiving jail time, he was given probation with mandatory counseling, which means that he was to remain in Orlando under strict conditions and attend therapy or rehabilitation programs. Now, later that same year in 2010, a woman who I'll call Jane was at home in the Bellagio apartments on Samorian Boulevard on an ordinary morning. Jane was an Afghanistan war veteran, someone who'd been through the kind of experiences that most people only read about. On that day, her father, who lived with her, had left for work and the house was quiet. She'd started tidying the living room and was about to prepare her coffee when she heard something at the door. By the time she turned around, Edgar was already inside with a mask over his face and a knife at her throat. Before she actually could process what was happening, he was trying to do stuff on her. Now, Jane didn't scream, and with the blade that close, she couldn't. Still, she didn't freeze either. Whatever her years of service in Afghanistan had built into her took over. She fought back, driving her knee into him, twisting, kicking, and creating any distance she could between his knife and her body. Now, it was in the middle of that struggle that she saw a Hello Kitty tattoo on his forearm, and even with a knife at her throat, something about it snagged at her memory. She'd seen that tattoo before, yet she couldn't quite remember where. Now, it took her a moment to place it, but then it came came back. A few weeks earlier, she'd met a man near her apartment who introduced himself to her as Jose. Jose had asked for water, which she'd given him, and when he stretched to take the bottle, she had seen the same distinctive tattoo, Hello Kitty. Now she didn't know his full name, but she now knew one thing: this wasn't the first time they were meeting, and she needed him to know that she knew who he was. And so she told him directly, hoping to catch him off guard and make him stop. Yet Edgar didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed the knife closer and threatened to kill her. And in reflex, she kicked him continuously. Still, her combative skills couldn't stop. He was too strong, and so he then overpowered her and did stuff. When he was done, he told her again if she said anything, he would come back, and then he left. Now the incident left her shaken, but she immediately reported it, telling the police about Jose and what had happened earlier that day. And so an investigation was launched. A DNA test of the semen was then taken, but there wasn't a match in the system, and the case went cold. Yet Edgar wasn't done. The same year in 2010, he broke into the apartment again. This time did stuff to a young girl in the apartment complex who we will call Martha. Now the full details of what happened between Edgar and Martha were never made public. What is known though is that Martha was barely a teenager at the time, and that she'd been alone when he broke in and cornered her with a knife. Afterwards, Martha reported the incident to the police. She told them her attacker had a leg tattoo, and that was all that she could say about it, and so an investigation was opened again. Still, they had no suspects, and so the case went cold. But then in the next year, in February 2011, Edgar got back with his ex, Sabrina, after she'd given birth to their child. But that day, they'd been arguing when Edgar pushed her down the stairs. Now he then stood over her and beat her with a wooden mop handle before threatening to kill her with a knife. Now the incident left Sabrina badly injured, and so she was rushed to the hospital, and the police were also called. Yet Sabrina refused to press charges. Without her testimony, the case fell apart too, and Edgar received only a probation violation charge, which is the charge you get if you miss check-ins during probation or commit another offense. Edgar then served only 10 days in jail with extended supervision and then walked free. For about a year after that, nothing came in. No report, no new cases. Whether Edgar had stopped or was simply being more careful, no one really knew. But just past midnight on June 1st, 2012, he broke into a house again at Over Village apartment, Orlando, through a bedroom window. Now inside the house were two college students whose identities are publicly unknown, and so we will name them Mandy and Kelly. Now Mandy and Kelly were sleeping in their room when Edgar entered their bedroom wearing a black ski mask. Holding up a knife, he asked Mandy to stand up, taking her outside the room. He then tied her with an iPhone charger and threatened to kill her if she moved. And inside the room, he then did stuff on Kelly. On the other side of the wall though, Mandy could hear everything. When he was done, he escaped through the window, leaving both girls to suffer the aftermath of what had happened. Now the girls then called the police, while Kelly was rushed to the hospital and DNA evidence was collected. But still, just like before, there wasn't a match. Now during the investigation, they told the police that they'd seen a tattoo on the attacker. They described the same distinctive tattoo from the 2010 cold case. And following this information, the police reopened the case, and the search for what was now known as the Hello Kitty attacker began. Still, from 2012 to early 2014, no arrests were made. But then on May 5th, 2014, he struck again. But this time, Edgar made a mistake. That morning, Edgar approached a 20-year-old at the parking lot of an IHOP restaurant on East Colonial Drive, Orlando. Now I call this girl Betty because her identity was withheld from the public. Now Betty had been sitting in her car when Edgar approached her, and when he got to her, he opened his pants, exposing himself to her. He then threatened to shoot her if she screamed as he forced his way into her car. And once inside, he again wanted to do stuff, but she resisted and tried using her knee to honk the horn of the car. Now Edgar then became frustrated and ran into a light-colored car before driving away. Now Betty was frightened and called the police, and as part of the investigation, a DNA sample was taken from her clothes. But when the results came back the next day from the forensic laboratory, a match was actually found, and the police had their suspect, Edgar Collazo. Now with this, 2 days after the incident, on May 7th, 25-year-old Edgar was arrested in his home in Orlando and charged with attempted violence. Now during his arraignment, he was denied bond as he was a flight risk and could run away before his trial. Now as the investigation continued, police actually linked his tattoo to that of the Hello Kitty cold case. They invited Kelly, who was now 4 years older than what she'd been at the time, to identify her attacker in a lineup in which Edgar was part, and when Kelly saw his leg tattoo, she identified him correctly, recalling that she'd seen the same tattoo on the day of the attack. And when they checked his DNA with the other cases, it matched. And with this evidence, he now faced 8 charges: 3 counts of assault, 2 counts of burglary, battery, meaning he physically hurt the girls, and then also kidnapping. Now later that day, the police reported that they'd caught the Hello Kitty attacker, and almost all Orlando news outlets picked up the story. Eventually, on July 7, 2015, the case went to Orange County Circuit Court. Now the prosecutor's closing statement ended with an argument that if there was ever a case that deserved life in prison, this was certainly one of those.
Well, the state argued to the judge that if there was ever a case that deserved life in prison, they felt this was certainly one of those, and that was the argument they made.
And so 2 days later, on July 9, 2015, after just 1 hour and 15 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned, finding Edgar guilty on all 8 charges. According to Assistant State Attorney Ryan Williams, "I think the speed of the verdict just reflected the jurors' belief in the victims and the testimony." And so, having no other choice, the judge then sentenced Edgar the same year in August 2015 to 2 life sentences to be served simultaneously, which is the mandatory sentencing provided under Florida law for repeated offenders. On top of his life sentences, Judge Frederick Lawton added another 37.5 years for the burglary, kidnapping, and assault conviction, with no possibility of parole, which means that Edgar is guaranteed to spend his life in Florida State Prison.